I do want it to be known. What I'm about to put out is what we know at this time. Things could change as more information comes in. But the fact pattern I'm going to give you is what we know as of this moment in time. We do know that at 10 a.m. on Monday, police were dispatched for bank robbery at 1612 Independence Boulevard, which is a Wells Fargo bank. Suspect entered the bank and told the tellers that he had a gun and a bomb. He then completed the bank robbery. Detectives were able to conclude the investigation at 1 p.m. and at 3 p.m. the investigation led the detectives to America's Best Value Inn at 5725 Northampton Boulevard. Various units were called in for surveillance. Various units were called in as perimeter officers as well as a K-9 officer. Should the suspect leave the perimeter, K-9 officers then are deployed. It has to be known that at this particular moment in time, we had an idea where the suspect was, but he was moving. You know, a question was asked very pointedly yesterday, why didn't we notify everyone in the hotel? It's 160 rooms in that hotel. They don't have PA systems. We can't just get on and say we're looking for someone. Secondly, had we called all of the rooms, one of them might have been a suspect. And we might have gone from a bank robbery to a hostage barricade to who knows what with a man who says, I have a gun and a bomb. As the detectives were working through the case, they knew that the suspect was moving, and I have some photos for you. Why don't I put these out now so you could get this from the perspective of the officer who was on the scene. If you can give those out. And I'll give a second so everybody can get one of these. K-9 officer is a 3-year K-9 officer. He's a 4-year SWAT officer. He's highly seasoned. He's highly experienced. He was sent on this particular call. We send K-9 officers to calls where we have armed individuals. We know that. Their rules of engagement are pretty strict. This K-9 officer was set onto this side of the hotel. As you could see, you're looking at his perspective. There are 2 breezeways. A second breezeway down, past the sign that says pool, is where the K-9 officer was expecting the suspect, if he was going to run, would emerge from that particular location. K-9 officer had the dog on his left side. This is important to realize. He was on the left side of that sidewalk, and he had the dog on his left. The reason, all your rooms are on the right. The K-9 officer was placing his body between what could be citizens, what could be innocent people coming out of a room, and his dog. In other words, he was taking the proper precautions. As he worked his way down, a female came running through the breezeway into the parking lot. He was continually moving north at a slow pace, waiting for the suspect to emerge from that second breezeway. At this particular moment in time, the young child emerged, turned to his left, which put him right in front of the K-9. The dog then bit the young 11-year-old boy. Second thing we have to remember, this individual that we were looking for, detectives and officers were also notified that he was out on bond for 9 counts of a possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. So the individual that we were looking for, we had every reason to believe was armed, every reason to believe would use violence. The young child was bitten by the dog. There's no question about that. The officer immediately took control of the dog, immediately rendered aid to the child, and at 4:22 rescue was called for a dog bite, and at 4:24 rescue signed en route to the scene. Rescue arrived at 4:47 p.m. We transported the child to the hospital for his emergency care. Yesterday, I did contact both the mother and the father via cell phone. They left the area. They were traveling to North Carolina. I spoke to both of them, asking for the condition of their son, just to let them know that we did care about the condition of their son. Today, risk management contacted the young boy's father and relayed to him that risk management had all the paperwork. There was a question about why weren't they given any paperwork, because it wasn't completed at that moment in time. We had to finish everything. Risk management did contact the father, basically advising him that those hospital bills that were incurred are picked up by the city, as they should be, and any future medical attention the young boy may need will be covered by the city. Suspect was later moved out of the inner perimeter of the hotel. K-9 then deployed to assist in the apprehension of the suspect. He was apprehended. K-9 was not used. And that's another important thing to remember. K-9 was not used because the rules of engagement at that time were such that K-9 did not have to be deployed to make the apprehension. In other words, he was apprehended without incident. That's what we would say. Questions? Wait a minute, Mike, I'll start with you first.
Chief, was the police dog on a leash?
Yes, he was. He was on a tight leash. K-9 officer figures it was about a 1 foot, so we'll go with a 1 foot leash at that time.
And Chief, I can follow up on that. I know I'm not an expert in how these police dogs are deployed, but I know they can act on a K-9 officer's command.
Correct.
And they can also act on their own. How did this dog, or what command, or what was done to cause this dog to leap at the boy?
If you look at the picture, K-9 officer was getting close to that breezeway when that young boy came running around the corner. He basically ran right into the dog, and the dog reacted. There was no command given by the officer. There never would have been a command given by that officer.
Is that common for a dog to react in that, in that type of a situation?
We've had situations where other police officers have bumped into a K-9 and the K-9 reacts. Remember, it's a dog.
So what's now with the K-9 handler and the K-9, what happens next with them? Are they on any sort of relief, or are they still working?
They're working. What we're doing now is we're putting them, the officer feels absolutely terrible about this kind of situation, and as we all do. I'm a dad, I'm a grandfather, I feel especially bad, and I kind of relate to the grandfather that you all spoke to yesterday. So what we're doing with the officer and the dog is we're decompressing them. We're giving them some training, we're putting them with another K-9 officer, but they'll go back to full duty.
Do you know how long the biting incident lasted for?
It was extremely quick. The officer said as soon as the dog latched onto the young boy, he took the dog off. And I think from the photos, the bite pattern would show that, because there's 3 puncture wounds. There's no tearing. It's just 3 puncture wounds.
Because the mom of the victim said that she was struggling trying to get the dog off as well as the handler.
Yes.
And it was a prolonged period of time, is the way she described
right.
it. Right.
And from her perception, it probably was a prolonged period, but I could tell you if that dog had a prolonged bite on that young child, our conversation may be totally different at this moment in time. And like I said, we're going from what that K-9 handler had to say. He was immediately on the scene, and what the initial statements from the boy's mother were.
Chief, I don't want to belabor this point here, and I understand dogs can be a little unpredictable, but police dogs are designed to be more predictable. If this were a civilian walking down the sidewalk and a child ran in from the dog into the dog, and that civilian dog bit the child, there would be beach animal control involved.
Absolutely.
There would be a concern that the civilian handler was not properly in control of the dog. There would be an expectation that a young child running into a civilian dog would not be bitten. What is different about a police dog, or the tension, or the training that allows, as you said, even police officers to get nipped at by a dog?
Because the dog is in what we call work mode. At that moment in time, the dog is going to work. Secondly, when someone comes into contact with a dog, we can have all the training we want in the world. In the inner recesses of the DNA of that dog, he's going to react the way he reacts. You're right. If it was a civilian that bit someone, we'd have a dog bite. We'd want to see was the handler using correct methods to control the dog. I feel very comfortable that this K-9 officer had total control of that dog. It was an accident, and sometimes accidents happen. Even with highly trained expert people, accidents will happen occasionally. This is one of those times.
So the child ran down through the corridor that, if the suspect were to flee, that would have been the same corridor?
It was, as you're looking.
Just want to make sure I understand.
you see where the pool sign is.
Mhm.
There's another corridor beyond that.
Okay.
This corridor here is where the child ran.
The
So
further corridor.
The closer
The
corridor.
closer one, okay.
Right. So he was right there. The officer, if you see that door, the officer was a few feet before that door. So when that young kid came around, he was right there, right on the dog. It was an extremely quick amount of time. You know, we have 0.25 seconds to react to something as you're driving your car. NHTSA will tell you that. You have 0.25 seconds to see what's happening, for your brain to identify it, your brain to tell your muscles what to do. During that time period, we had a dog bite.
Chief, is there a difference in how the dog is set up? And I'm using probably the wrong words here, but you know, when you say you put him into work mode, is that dog doing different things than he would, for example, if he's at Mount Trashmore and you're just out patrolling? Because you know, I know maybe not this department, but other departments will bring dogs to schools.
Absolutely.
Will bring dogs to public events, and the dogs are pretty relaxed and they can.
They are.
Interact with kids. What's the difference between the work mode and
At no time when you bring a dog to a school does anybody ever pet the dog. They don't let them get that close to the animal. When I say they're in a work mode, it's usually once you take the dog out of the truck, that's when we start to go to work. And the dog realizes that in that particular time he's going to work. It's not a time to pet a dog or get too close to it. We train as best we can in order to protect our public. Again, this officer, I think, did a very good move by putting the dog on the left side. So his body was between those doors on the right where a citizen could have come out and where the animal was. That's about the best I can tell. You know, they go to work. But at home, you know, these animals interact with the family. They're a family pet. They come into the house, they sit down, and the family takes care of them. But it's like at that moment in time, once that dog gets into the car and the officer is in uniform, he's in a work mode.
You said the officer was obviously very experienced. I just wanted to clarify. You said 3 years on the K-9 unit and 4 on SWAT?
Yeah, I'm not exactly, I haven't looked at his personnel jacket, but that was the word of his supervisor.
Okay.
That he's been a SWAT officer for 4 years, and then he transferred over to K-9.
Okay. And you said that they're doing some additional training right now, but you expect them to, both the officer and the K-9, to go back on full duty. Is that once your investigation is complete, or what? I guess what's sort of the time?
That'll probably be the decision of the sergeant once he feels that the officer is decompressed and that he can then put him back into full mode. And when I say extra training, it's not any kind of remedial training. They're just going through some training scenarios right now.
Chief, I know your department is very big into learning from incidents like this. What can you take away from this, and what can you do, if anything, to prevent a similar situation in the future?
That's a very good question. What can we take away? They're reviewing everything now. The K-9, the subject matter experts are reviewing everything they could possibly review. And if they say that we could change a procedure better, they will do that. If they say we can learn from this, they will do it. I am sure that when they go through future training, they will refer back to this particular incident. You know, we have 16 dogs, I believe.
15 work dogs.
15 work dogs. This is known as a work dog. And we have one that's a explosives dog. So we have 15 work dogs. And the amount of time that they're used in an apprehension scenario is minimal compared to the number of dogs that we have. But with each one, we go through a learning phase. That one where I told you earlier where an officer was actually bitten by a dog, we go back and we train the uniform officers. Once K-9 is deployed, there's an area, a sphere of that you stay out of because the dog is at work.
Do you know if this is one of the shepherds or one of the mellow ones?
I do not know. I do not know.
Chief, just speaking about transparency, you know, we didn't know about this.
You
This
did-
happened on Monday. We then got called by a family member that said someone was bit, and then we called the police department. And so a day later, we're learning from the police department that a child was bit by a police dog. Why did it take so long? Why not come out on Monday and come forward and just be transparent about what happened?
Look at the time that it happened. They didn't get everything put together till Monday evening. We were all briefed on Tuesday morning. What I wanted to do was contact the family first. Mom and Dad had both left the area. They were down to North Carolina. I know that I believe it was the grandfather who contacted most of the media. I felt it was better to talk to mom and dad first prior to the grandfather. I wanted all of the facts to be put in place. We did put our press release out later in the afternoon saying that a child was bitten, and here we are today. So in some respects, we could work all night on some of these cases, but in a city of our size, we have a few things going on at the same time, and I wanted to make sure that we spoke to the family first before I put this out to the general public.
I know the officer is and the dog as well are decompressing. What's the best way to describe that? Is the officer on administrative duty? Or?
No, he's not on administrative assignment. He's working with another K-9 and going through some of the basic training things. And I use the term decompressing at this moment. It's an experience for a K-9 handler. It's interesting. Whenever we use force in police work, we don't like to use force. In this particular case, it was an accidental use of force, so to speak. So we're just giving this officer a little bit of time and space. And he's a very experienced, very well together police officer.
And the dog is still in service?
With his handler.
With his handler.
In other words, we don't switch dogs and handlers. Once a dog is assigned to a handler, that's the team. If that dog gets to a point where they have to be retired for a medical reason or they get too old, then that dog gets retired. Usually the handler takes it as a pet. We get a new dog, a brand new dog for that handler, and they train together. There is that bonding time that they need.
Chief, do you know the time elapsed from the boy being bitten to the suspect apprehension? Was it seconds? Was it minutes? Was it a longer period?
One moment. 8 minutes.
8 minutes.
Approximately 8 minutes. So we had eyes on the suspect. We were, remember, while this was happening, we also had what we assumed to be an armed, violent individual in that particular location. So we had to move on both things at the same time.
Were you able to determine from the suspect or apprehending suspect whether he was at that time at the apprehension or at the bank actually armed, or were these just?
I'm going to keep that one to the investigation.
This picture, was this taken after the fact, or was this just, tell me about the picture.
Oh, which one am I looking at? The sergeant in charge of K-9 went back up and took the photos where the officer would have been standing and where the suspect would. I have another one that shows just how close that breezeway is, and we'll be more than happy to give that to you also.
Chief, were there any police video recordings made that would have?
No police recordings.
Are you reviewing any video from the motel?
We're going back up to the hotel to speak if they have the video.
Oh, I went to the hotel and I was told it was already taken
Okay.
by police.
By police?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But they didn't have any to give it to us.
All right. I think that's about it, guys. On just one final note, I know that when everyone interviewed, I believe it was the grandfather, he was very upset and very concerned. I could appreciate all of his concerns. I just think that our communication was with the mom and dad first. Legally, that's where we need to go, and I think ethically, that's the place where we start. I think the other big question was, as it should be, who's going to take care of these medical bills that are going to come through? And again, we've already been in touch with risk management. They contacted the father. Obviously, the city's going to handle that.
The city's going to handle that in its entirety, from the current to any foreseeable.
I'm going to say reasonable. Mike, I don't know where risk management says, okay, at this point, care has been given. I'll have to let you speak with them directly. But there too, for them this morning to reach out and contact the family was, I think, much quicker than usually what happens in city government.
And Chief, one last question. You characterize this as an accident. Does that trigger any type of a different internal investigation as opposed to, like an accidental gunshot versus an intentional gunshot, or two different types of investigations? Where would this one be?
No, this one is right in there. We open what we call an inquiry. An inquiry says, usually they open in my office or Deputy Chief's office, and we want to know exactly what transpired. That's a good question, because we'll have an accidental discharge, or an officer is handling his weapon and the weapon goes off. We will then do an inquiry to make sure that everything was followed, and sometimes the word accidental discharge, it's an accident.
Thank you, Chief.
Okay.